Hey guys, and welcome back to Monka, where stuff ensues, but yesterday I beat a game, and so I kind of want to talk about it for a few reasons. You know, that's just kind of how we get down on this channel, but yesterday I beat a little known game that came out about a month or so ago called Trinity Trigger. This is the Nintendo Switch version of Trinity Trigger, but as I understand it also came out on PlayStation as well as PC. Originally came out in Japan in September of 2022. It was developed and self-published by FurYu in Japan. When it came to the West in May of 2023, it was published by Xseed. Now, I hold FurYu in pretty high opinions, to be honest, as a developer, as I really liked Caligula Effect, even though a lot of other people didn't, and as well I really liked Crystar. I intend to eventually play Caligula Effect 2 eventually. It's a game in 2023 that I definitely want to play, as well as Monarch, which I believe came out either last year or 2 years ago. I also want to play that one, and as well later in the year in October, FurYu has Cry Machina coming out, and pretty much when it comes out, if I'm not playing a game at the time, I'm going to be playing Cry Machina because I really want to play that game. But I hold FurYu in a pretty high regard. Initially, I wasn't really interested in this game until I heard FurYu was handling it. At that point, I really wanted to play this game because it's a FurYu game and I really like FurYu games. I probably would have played it either way, to be honest, because, you know, it's just a JRPG that was coming out and I was kind of interested. But the fact that FurYu was developing it definitely put my interest higher and definitely made me get to it sooner. But Trinity Trigger is a top-down action RPG in the style of a mana game. It took me a total of 22 hours to beat. That's including the fact that I did all the side quests in the game, which there's 33. And my overall opinion on Trinity Trigger is that it's a pretty fun game, to be honest. Yeah, it definitely has its flaws, to be honest. It's definitely not a perfect game, but I imagine I'll get a follow-up by FurYu, and I think they'll improve on the mistakes of this game. But even though it is flawed, it is still a very fun time, to be honest. And it's just kind of an enjoyable time for an action RPG. But in terms of the graphics are kind of stylized in the way of the Alliance Alive, which I've never really played, but I have seen the graphics for, and the game definitely kind of looks like that game. It's not the prettiest looking game, to be honest, but at the same time, it doesn't look bad at all either. As well, the game has some anime cutscenes within it. It only has 4, to be honest, and I wish the game had more because it's kind of a cool take for its kind of graphical aesthetic. These kind of anime cutscenes are really cool. They did something similar in the Caligula Effect. I do not believe they did it in Crystar, but they did do it in Caligula Effect, and I thought it was pretty cool. I just wish the game had more of them because it only has like 4 or 5 of them, but the stylization for those kind of anime cutscenes are really cool. But as well, the game has character portraits when they're having conversations, and they're nicely animated and they look nice as well. So the graphics, at least for endgame, are kind of barren, but the kind of art style that they go for like the cutscenes and like the character sprites are pretty cool. In terms of performance, the game runs at a solid 60 FPS all the way through. No hitches at all, because really it's just a top-down action JRPG and it really just isn't going to be very stressful on the Switch. But overall, the graphics are pretty good, if not a little basic, but the anime cutscenes as well, the character sprites look really good, and the performance is just rock solid because, I mean, it's just a top-down action RPG. But in terms of the music and voice actors, there's not a lot to say about the music, to be honest. Kind of disappointing for a FurYu game because the previous 2 that I've played had pretty solid soundtracks. This one has a pretty alright soundtrack, to be honest. It's nothing amazing though, and it's nothing standout. There's a couple songs in here that are better than some other songs, but there's no real standouts in the soundtrack, which is kind of disappointing. So in terms of the soundtrack, it does its job, but it's nothing memorable. In terms of voice actors, the voice actors are pretty alright, to be honest. For side characters, they're nothing really all that amazing, but they play their role. The voice actors for the main characters are pretty strong, to be honest. They all do their part to bring out the characters that they play, and I can appreciate that, to be honest. So I have no complaints with the voice actors overall. But in terms of music and voice actors, the music is nothing crazy, to be honest, but it does its job, and as well, the voice actors do their role as well, specifically being strong within the main characters. But in terms of the story and characters, the story is kind of interesting, but at the same time, this is a fantasy JRPG, so it kind of is generic, but it's nothing terrible, to be honest. The story is pretty much that there's 2 factions of gods known as Chaos and Order. These gods have been warring for a while, and their war pretty much ravaged the land known as Trinitia, as well as sending down their weapons into the land of Trinitia and pretty much creating regions from those weapons. Now, due to the war pretty much ending in a stalemate, the gods appoint somewhat of a demigod, kind of known as a god warrior, that will fight on their behalf to determine whether Chaos or Order will win. The story pretty much kicks off with you playing as a character known as Xian, who is pretty much just living his own normal life until there's an assassination attempt against him because he finds out that he is one of the god warriors. He links links up with his trigger, which is pretty much kind of like a creature that is sentient and can speak, but also acts as its owner's weapon. But he links up with his trigger known as Flam, and as well links up with Elise and her trigger known as Whis, as they try to find a solution to this conflict between the gods and resolve it peacefully instead of having to war it out with the other god warrior to determine who wins. As well, through that adventure, Elise and Cian link up with a third character known as Xantis and his trigger known as Ray. The story is alright, to be honest. I wouldn't say it's anything crazy, but you know, it's cool nonetheless, and it keeps the game moving. I would say the stronger point is the characters. Now, this game pretty much keeps the cast to a main cast of 6 characters, and the rest are pretty much side characters. I like the main cast of 3, even though they are kind of generic in their personalities. Cian is the kind of silent but strong-willed individual, while Elise is kind of like the intelligent and knowledgeable one in the group, and Xantis is just kind of your happy-go-lucky goofball of the group. So all their personalities are kind of tropey and generic, but to be honest, I like the characters enough, and as well, their triggers are given personalities that their characters kind of play off of, and I enjoy that as well. Would I say I'll be remembering these characters 10 years from now? Probably not, to be honest, but the characters are still decent nonetheless, if not a bit tropey and generic. But in terms of the story and characters, the story is alright, if not fitting within the vein of a fantasy RPG story, and the characters are alright as well, if not a bit tropey and generic. Now, the gameplay is kind of the meat and potatoes of this game and the main focus of this game. Starting off with the world overall, the world is kind of interesting, but at points is kind of not all that interesting as well. These cities are pretty generic, to be honest. They're not all that interesting, but within the cities you'll of course be buying from the shops, buying potions and stuff like that, and as well crafting new gear and stuff like that, as well as accepting the side quests. You also have the roads in between these cities in which you will battle monsters, gather resources, find treasure, etc., as well as doing the side quests within those areas. And then you have the dungeons, which are known as Arma, which within the story pretty much are explained as influencing the landscape of every area they're within, but the Arma serve as the dungeons where you'll battle enemy, collect treasure, and as well unlock new weapons. Honestly, this game feels very much structured, kind of like a Pokemon game, to be honest, because you have your cities, you have the roads in between the cities, and then you also have the dungeons. That being said, the progression through this world is very linear. They don't like you wandering too much off the beaten path within reason of expectation of the story. Pretty much if you try to go in a direction where the story doesn't want you to go at that time, they'll gatekeep you from going there and they won't let you go that way. It's kind of lame, but at the same time, I don't really mind linear games, so it's not all that big of an issue. But I feel like the world overall is pretty alright. I enjoyed mainly traveling from city to city because the battles in the world in between the cities is kind of interesting. The cities are pretty generic, and kind of the landscape overall of the world is kind of generic. I specifically like the snowy area and the volcano one the most, but as well there's a desert, as well as a forest area and like a swamp area, and very generic areas, to be honest, for a JRPG. I don't feel like that's the fault of Trinity Trigger. This is just retreading ground for fantasy RPGs that just doesn't have a lot of wiggle room to do something new with. But the world overall and the exploration of the world overall is pretty alright. It is, like I said, a linear game, so there isn't a whole lot of exploration, but the roads in between these cities are fun to battle through and have some interesting areas. One of the complaints I have about the world overall is that there are some just weird areas within the world that are just big empty areas that just kind of have no purpose at all. Whether that's within the areas within the roads, which will just have a big barren area with nothing to do, not even treasure chests or enemies or anything, or whether that's within the cities like the castle where that has a bunch of rooms, but they have a bunch of rooms with nothing in them. It's kind of just weird dead space within the world. Just kind of sucks, to be honest, because there's just so much room with just nothing really happening in it. But the main part of this game is the combat, which is kind of generic, but it's still fun nonetheless. The game is a top-down ARPG, like something similar to the original Mana games, and honestly it plays a lot like that too. You'll pretty much just be hacking and slashing through enemies. You only really have 2 attack types, which kind of sucks. You have a 3-hit combo, and as well you kind of have an overcharge attack. That's pretty much all you can do with the hits, because you can do a 1-2-3 hit, or you can do the supercharge attack, and as well you have a gauge that lets you either do something like defense up, damage up or critical damage out when you decide to activate it. But the 3-hit combo you can customize to a degree, but it's not all that customizable. You can pick between 2 options for your 3-hit combo. Pretty much you can pick each step of the 3-hit combo, but you can choose between 2 different attack types. I wish they had more options within that because it would have made the 3-hit combo a lot more customizable. But besides that, it's pretty generic. The combat really is nothing crazy. You just hack and slash through enemies, and as well you're able to dodge. The hit sound effects don't really sound all that great, which kind of sucks to be honest. In a game where you're going with pretty basic combat, the fact that the combat doesn't sound very satisfying is kind of shitty, but I digress nonetheless. The kind of cool part of the game is having these triggers which transform into weapons, but as well you can switch between a wide varieties of weapons between all the characters. So you can select a sword, a lance, as well you can select kind of like a energy pistol, a bow, an axe, amongst other weapons. You have a high variety of kind of choosing what kind of weapons you want to use, which is kind of cool. So whether you want to go with close range that's fast, or whether you want to go with a ranged weapon or an intermediate weapon, you can kind of choose and pick your battles. And between your 3 characters, you can kind of customize to have the best balance of all worlds. But besides that, the combat is pretty generic. You don't get a lot of options in terms of upgrading. You can upgrade your weapons to a little bit of a degree. You can pretty much just up the attack of the weapons, and that's about it, to be honest. You don't really get new weapons or armor, so the economy is kind of shit in this game, to be honest, because you don't have a constant drain of your money from weapons and armor. Instead, you buy potions and stuff like that with armor, but you can also buy and craft something called manatite, which is kind of like materia, so you can do HP up as well as defense up and stuff like that, attack up, etc. That doesn't drain a lot of money either, so to be honest, in the economy, you're never really hurting. You're always kind of in a rich position. But besides that, the combat is still fun nonetheless, and it's just kind of mindless, to be honest. So I kind of enjoy that, to be honest. I know some people won't, but I kind of just like that kind of mindless combat, just slashing through enemies and having a good time. And if you can appreciate that, then I think you'd like this game as well. But a few issues that I want to bring up before I close out the gameplay section is the fact that the game has co-op, but the co-op is only local. There is no online co-op, which is kind of unfortunate. I'm glad nonetheless that it does have the option for co-op, but I really wish it had online co-op, at least for an option. That would have been kind of cool. But as well, near the middle of the game kind of starts to drag because there's about a 2-hour segment, or I'd say maybe an hour and a half segment, where the game decides to do a lot of exposition and doesn't let you really leave a locked area at all. And that part of the game drags just because it just kind of locks you out of doing what you want to do and just kind of makes you experience the story, which kind of sucks, to be honest, but I digress. But as well, the game has typical JRPG tropes. There is a sewer level, a character will leave the party, albeit for half an hour, but they still leave the party. And as well, your party gets thrown in jail at one point. So there are JRPG tropes very heavy in this game, but it's still enjoyable. Just know that there's JRPG tropes abound in this game, and it's very much a JRPG. As well, my last complaint to levy against this game is the AI. The AI is not very smart at all. Pretty much, if you attack an enemy, they'll start to attack as well, and occasionally they'll dodge out of the way of attacks. They will never do their powered up attack, they'll never activate their buffs either, and they'll just never really swap their weapons either, unless you specifically switch through them and swap the weapons for them. Your AI companions just do the bare minimum, and they're not very smart. I wish they had more depth to them. So I wish they could switch their weapons. I wish they could do their ultimate move. I wish they could do their buffs as well. I just wish that they had more to them instead of just being very generic AI. But overall, in terms of gameplay, it's enjoyable, if not a bit basic and mindless. And as well, the world is a bit generic, but it's fun to explore when you're going between the routes. But overall, my opinion on Trinity Trigger is that it's an enjoyable game, to be honest, and I enjoyed it a decent amount. Now, is this FurYu's best work? Not at all, I don't think. It's very much a mana-inspired game, and I think they did well with what they did. That being said, I don't think it's a must-play game, but I think it's fun nonetheless if you want a kind of basic and mindless action RPG. And as well, I found it enjoyable just because it has that kind of budget JRPG charm, and the charm that I find within FurYu games is also ever present in this game. Before closing this out though, I have a petty complaint, which is that the cover art of this game kind of sucks. Now, the Day 1 edition has a lot better cover art, and honestly, I don't know why they didn't go with this cover art for the physical edition instead of going with what they went with, which just doesn't really represent the game very well. They should have went with this, but they didn't, and I don't know why, but that's kind of a petty complaint that I have. But overall though, Trinity Trigger is an enjoyable JRPG. I think some people will find some enjoyment out of it, and hopefully it gets a sequel that builds it up better. But thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you. Stay chill.